Hi, everybody. My name is Faye Johnson. We're going to go this direction. That's me. I have worked for a bunch of the big tech companies we were just complaining about a second ago. My background originally is in human rights, and I worked on anti-human trafficking initiatives and then ended up going into big tech to work on what we call trust and safety, which is the efforts in-house to try and make sure the platforms are safe. A quick why, and then we'll get into what I built. So as much as people are shifting away from social and most platforms are seeing, minus TikTok, sort of a decrease in the amount of time spent on these platforms, there's still a lot of people who are using social on a daily basis. We're looking at about 5 billion people who are still using social. So one of the things I wanted to tackle is what are some of the interesting ways we can think about making existing social platforms safe, given the fact that they are still in use. Many of you know that one of the challenges with social platforms is that they can contribute to mental health crises. There can be experiences of bullying and harassment and toxicity. You'll see here that approximately 38% of people experience sort of a negative impact on their mental health from regular use, and that 41% of adults have experienced online harassment, which is a very large percentage. And so we know that there is still a lot of room for improvement when it comes to making sure that these platforms that people are still using are safe and not negative on people overall. How's moderation done today? Basically, there are a couple strategies. Talking about transparency, I built transparency.com when I worked at Meta, so you can actually go there and actually see enforcement information. But most platforms have a three-pronged approach, which are to remove, so removing content that violates a policy, to reduce exposure, and to sort of inform people, which is what the strategy tends to be around things that are sort of newsworthy or potentially misinformation. So one of the things they also do is reducing it. This is something we built when I was at Nextdoor, which is essentially like hiding or filtering out content from distribution feeds if it sort of hit a certain threshold of toxicity. And then, of course, there's the reactive nature where platforms are not doing proactive classification, but they're relying on you to report content. On average, about 12% of users report content, or 12%, which is a very low percentage of content that people are exposed to. So we know that relying on users to report things that they see are problematic tends not to be a successful means because the exposure's already happened. There's a lot of bystanders. If somebody's getting bullied or harassed and they know about in a private channel, it might not be something that can be reported directly by somebody else. Okay, so one of the issues with content moderation, obviously, is that there are a lot of errors when you're making tens of millions of decisions a day. That also means that even if you have a really low error rates or a sort of false positive or false negative rate that sits around 1% on highly problematic content or things that have to do with bullying and harassment, which require a lot of context, you might be looking at a 10% error rate. When you're making millions of decisions, that's a lot of people who are affected, both by their content being potentially taken down or their content being left up that ends up being harmful. So what are some of the things we can think about doing? Okay, so the goal of this project was to sort of reduce negative and harmful experiences online, to find a way to keep more people in the conversation, because one of the things that we see is that historically marginalized voices get pushed off the platform if they're being harassed, targeted, don't feel like they're sort of safe to sort of either express themselves or to sort of engage with others on platforms. And the more those negative experiences happen towards historically marginalized communities, we end up sort of losing people in the conversation that otherwise would be able to sort of contribute to positive dialogue. And that's one of the things we're trying to explore here with the idea of having sort of self-moderation as an idea. So some of the research that we did was that, and I say we because I sort of enrolled a bunch of random people to help me on this project, is that there are some studies that show that if you're able to expose people to sort of understanding that their content is potentially toxic or viewed as being harmful by other people, they will sort of self-moderate or consider rewriting or reframing their content. One of the things we experienced when I was at Meta is that when we would sort of take down people's content, a very large percentage of people, sort of not the intentionally bad actors, but the person who wrote something or posted something, say a mom who posted a naked photo of their child in the bathtub, they're not intending to create content that can be misused, but we might tell them, hey, your content was taken down for violating community guidelines. And we saw a large percentage of people just actually responding back, being like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. And actually made me sort of have this like hope in humanity that a lot of people whose content was taken down didn't know they were violating a community guideline, wanted to apologize, expected there to be sort of a two-way communication with these platforms, which obviously wasn't happening at the scale that these things were happening. I'm thinking about what are the ways that we can actually sort of make some of that classification or like risk of potentially having your content taken down visible to people before they post it, so that we're at the top of the funnel, not getting to a place where content is being posted and then only sort of caught once it's already potentially harmed people. So we're testing something called nudges. Nudges is the idea that you are able to sort of encourage people or give a little behavioral nudge. Here are 3 different ones that are in practice today. My team and I built this at Nextdoor when I was head of trust and safety there, which is sort of saying like, consider being kind. We would sort of see if you were entering a conversation or if you'd essentially pre-typed in something, saying things that sort of violated our guidelines or sort of had specific, in this case, classification based on text. TikTok also has their own one, sort of nudging people. Do you want to reconsider what you're posting? This is essentially being like real-time classification of text before it gets posted. And then Instagram has also implemented something like this, building on what Nextdoor has been doing for a while. All right, here's my project. It's called Clear Sky. CLR, sky, there's a clear sky spelled out all the way, which is something else. But the vision here is for us to sort of create a more civil social media by empowering people to have an understanding of how their content might be perceived by others before they post it. We launched 3 weeks ago or so. You can check it out. It's live at Clear Sky. We'll talk about how it works. clrsky.ai is where you can go and sort of learn a little bit more about the platform and check it out on Blue Sky. Sort of quick overview of how it works. We implemented 3 things. The first one is we're calling a toxicity weather report. We're essentially classifying the content through an open source toxicity classifier that Google builds through their Jigsaw program. It's called Perspective API. It's not perfect. We've bumped into a whole bunch of errors with it already. Bless the internet for finding all the things and giving me screenshots about how things went wrong. But the idea is the weather report is like a high level thing that says like, it's sunny, it's a little cloudy. And we sort of go through the toxicity scores up to the sort of stormy, where we actually give you a half screen pop-up and it's like, you might want to consider rewriting this. Because at the sort of top levels, we're at essentially 9.5 out of 10 people will think that your comment is unkind or toxic. So sort of thinking about how will this be perceived by others? And then using Gen AI, which has sort of been trained on nonviolent communication, bridge building, perspective taking, to rewrite your thoughts. So even if you're moving quickly, the idea with Gen AI rewrite, we've framed it so that you're saying like, at Nextdoor, for example, there was a lot of fighting about dog poop, trash cans, really stuff that was not particularly important, but people were really getting at each other. And people might say like, F you, for like trash cans should be left out or whatever. And this sort of thing would be like, hey, I'm a little frustrated by the perspective XY. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about why you think the trash can should be blah, blah, blah? So the idea here is to give people language if they, I don't know, haven't been practicing nonviolent communication in their daily lives or haven't gone to therapy, Gen AI. And then Perspective Assistant is something else we're trying, which I'd love you guys to try out and give us your feedback on. That essentially takes the context of the thread when it does the Gen AI rewrite to give you the perspective to sort of be able to be like, in this conversation, how might I reframe this? So essentially, we're bringing a sort of a commonly used trust and safety feature and actually showing it to users. We've integrated this into the composer. You'll see this here in Stormy within Blue Sky. Essentially shows you where you are on the spectrum, and you'll see that the Gen AI rewrite is there. So it doesn't actually stop you from posting anything. We're not suppressing speech. You can still post whatever you want, but it gives you a little bit of a signal to decide what to do. And then sort of how was it built? I mentioned we built in leverage Perspective API. Obviously, as a one-person fellow at an academic institution, I didn't have the ability to build a large language model for classification myself. So what we did was sort of figured out how could we integrate things that existed today to test out whether or not this was useful, and then see if it could be a nudge towards some of the larger platforms to consider thinking about ways to integrate user-facing features for users to think about what they want to do, rather than the sort of black box of social media moderation happening after the fact. Considerations for large companies, one would be consider classification capabilities. Most models right now are still based on both tone, which is sort of small string, versus or text specific things. We found some errors where, for example, sort of referencing queer folks or Black folks, if you had any, or Jewish people, somebody sent me a screenshot that said, all Jewish people should go to the Holocaust Museum, but the string was capturing, you just said all Jewish people, which is a classification of a protected group for religious reasons, and then the word Holocaust was also included, and so it marked it as like as stormy, but somebody else like, all Jewish people should go to the Holocaust Museum, but because it's not doing analysis at a full string level, the partial string was sort of tagging it as being potentially stormy. So there are sort of limits to the way things are classified and what level of context these models have, which I think will actually get better with AI from like a sort of multimodal classification perspective, but we're not there yet. So we have to think about the risks of putting these things out there. There's obviously the concerns with actually how this data is trained. Obviously, AI is being sort of mapped against the existence of a lot of things on the internet. It's reinforcing power dynamics or norms or racial biases that exist already in online content. So we're sort of building in our own racial biases and other types of biases in these models. So we have to think really thoughtfully about how that will actually impact what gets classified. And then, as I mentioned, making sure people understand how this works so that they aren't just mad at you. Okay, some people loved this. I had quite a few of my like trust and safety friends were like, oh my gosh, if you get people to do this up front, it would sort of do some self-moderation. That'd be awesome. Also, the internet did not like the idea of me telling people that civility was the goal. A lot of people were saying that there's a lot of horrible things happening in the world. Getting people to be nice about it is like not the problem we should be fighting. I got like at least 10 personal emails telling me I should kill myself and telling me I should spend my time on other things and that I should be like working on stopping a genocide instead of working on this project. So the internet was not excited about being told to be civil. Other folks told me this is why this product needs to exist, because apparently people don't know how to express their opinions in kind ways. But thinking about actually terminology and language is important. When I worked at large social platforms, we'd always test our language to be like, does this land with people? Should we frame it as get a better response rather than be nice? Because people don't like the idea of tone policing. So this was the least of the offensive things that were sent to me. I probably had over 1,000 direct messages to me and easily 10 direct emails telling me to do things to myself that were unkind. So people were not super excited about this. So we have to think about how do you sort of frame it? And does this just reinforce the idea that this sort of thing should exist generally, regardless of whether or not people want to use it, because it's obviously optional. So my recommendation for platforms would be they should think about, is their classification high quality enough that you can actually give a signal to users? What are the errors? Because when you actually give some sort of visible signals to users when it comes to classification, it's like screenshotable, right? They're like, you got this one wrong, you got this wrong. And then sort of thinking about the risks associated with that. And then sort of thinking about what are the things that they could be doing up front when it comes to nudges to move this sort of kind of thing forward. I have heard from Blue Sky, the head of trust and safety there. He is interested in potentially integrating or testing this feature more broadly on Blue Sky, which would be a total win for us. He's just on vacation, so I'm gonna have to talk to him when he's back, because Blue Sky's trust and safety team is one person. So my ideal state would be for us to be able to hand over the code, which is, although Blue Sky is an open source protocol, very complicated and messy code base to work with. We had lots of hurdles. I've got some help from people in the room, but it's not an easy code base, but I'm hoping we're able to hand this code off to them and they can maybe test it at scale where they're able to do a little bit more logging to sort of see how it works overall. But we'd love to hear your feedback. Please check out, if you want to go straight to login, you actually go to clearsky.co. That will take you to your Blue Sky page login. Just use your Blue Sky credentials to log in and you'll have this interface there. Feel free to tell me your input on Blue Sky. You're also welcome just to reach out to me directly and we'll see what we can do to continue to tweak things. This is the team I worked with. Grateful for their help. Thanks all.